My name is Ryan Stenford, and for 23 years, I believed my stepfather, Marcus, loved me like his own son. Then my mother died, and he showed me exactly what I really meant to him. Standing outside St. Catherine's Chapel on the coldest February morning I can remember, watching them carry her casket through doors I wasn't allowed to enter, I realized that some betrayals cut so deep they reshape your entire understanding of who you are. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The funeral program in my trembling hands had every family member's name listed except mine. 23 years of Sunday dinners, birthday celebrations, and family vacations erased like I'd never existed. Marcus had made sure of that. The morning started like any other day of grief. I'd been awake since 4, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, the same room where Mom used to read me stories about knights who fought for justice and always won in the end. She'd been gone for 6 days, cancer finally claiming the woman who raised me to believe that family meant everything, that blood or not, love was what mattered most. I put on the black suit she'd bought me for my college graduation, the one she said made me look distinguished, like the lawyer I'd always dreamed of becoming. She never got to see me pass the bar exam, never got to see me hang my diploma on the wall. But I wore that suit anyway, because it was the last gift she'd given me and because I thought it would honor her memory. The drive to St. Catherine's took exactly 12 minutes. I know because I'd driven that route hundreds of times growing up, every Sunday for morning service, every Christmas Eve for midnight mass. The chapel sat on Millbrook Avenue, surrounded by ancient oak trees that Mom always said looked like gentle giants watching over the faithful. Those same trees now seemed to loom over me like silent witnesses to something terrible about to unfold. I parked across the street, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. My eyes were red-rimmed but dry. I'd cried myself empty over the past week. Today was about being strong for Mom, about celebrating the incredible woman who taught me that integrity wasn't negotiable and that standing up for what's right sometimes meant standing alone. The chapel parking lot was already full. Cars I recognized from years of family gatherings, vehicles belonging to neighbors who'd known Mom since before I was born, friends from her book club and the community garden she'd volunteered at every Saturday. I took a deep breath, straightened my tie, and walked across the street. Marcus was standing at the main entrance, greeting mourners with the practiced solemnity of a man who'd always been good at playing whatever role the moment required. He wore an expensive charcoal suit I'd never seen before, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the February wind. When he saw me approaching, his face hardened into something I didn't recognize. Ryan. His voice carried the chill of winter itself. "We need to talk." He didn't wait for my response, just walked toward the side of the building where a small garden memorial stood dedicated to longtime parishioners. I followed, confused but assuming he wanted a private moment before the service. Maybe he needed to lean on me, the way I'd hoped to lean on him. After all, we were both mourning the same woman, both trying to figure out how to exist in a world without her gentle presence. When we reached the memorial garden, Marcus turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. Not grief, not the shared pain I'd expected, something colder, more calculated. "You can't be here," he said simply, as if he were telling me the weather forecast. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're not welcome at service, your mother's service." He emphasized the words like they were weapons designed to wound. "This is for family and close friends, people who actually mattered to her." The world tilted sideways. 23 years of memories crashed through my mind like a slideshow on fast forward. Marcus teaching me to drive in the church parking lot after Sunday service. Marcus walking me through my first job interview over breakfast at our kitchen table. Marcus sitting in the front row at my high school graduation, cheering louder than anyone when I received the Academic Excellence Award. "I don't understand," I managed to say, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "I am family. I've been your son for over 2 decades." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or recognition of shared history. "Stepson, there's a difference, Ryan. A legal difference, a biological difference, and most importantly, a financial difference." The words hit me like physical blows. Financial difference. What did money have to do with burying the woman who'd been the heart of our family? She was my mother, I said, the words coming out harder than I intended. She raised me. She loved me. I have every right to be here. Actually, you don't. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a restraining order, filed yesterday afternoon. If you come within 50 feet of this building today, if you attempt to enter this service, if you cause any disruption whatsoever, you'll be arrested. I stared at the paper he held out like it was a snake ready to strike. You got a restraining order to keep me from my own mother's funeral? Not your mother, my wife. And yes, I did what was necessary to ensure this day proceeds with dignity and respect. Ellen deserves better than having her troubled stepson causing scenes and making demands. Troubled stepson. The phrase echoed in my head like a curse word I'd never heard before. In 23 years, Marcus had never once referred to me as troubled. He'd been proud of my grades, proud of my acceptance to law school, proud of the internship I'd landed at Morrison & Associates. He'd bragged to his golf buddies about his son, the lawyer. What's this really about? I asked, though part of me was beginning to understand. The puzzle pieces were floating in my peripheral vision, not quite forming a complete picture, but suggesting an image I didn't want to see clearly. Marcus folded the restraining order and slipped it back into his pocket. It's about moving forward appropriately. Your mother is gone, Ryan. The family structure she maintained is gone with her. It's time you accept that reality and find your own way in the world. The family structure she maintained, I repeated slowly. You mean the part where she insisted you treat me like your actual son? For just a moment, Marcus's mask slipped, and I saw something raw and honest underneath. Not grief for his wife, but relief. Relief that the woman who'd spent over 2 decades making him pretend to love me was finally gone. When we reached the memorial garden, Marcus turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. Not grief, not the shared pain I'd expected. Something colder, more calculated. You can't be here, he said simply, as if he were telling me the weather forecast. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. What do you mean? I mean you're not welcome at this service, your mother's service. He emphasized the words like they were weapons designed to wound. This is for family and close friends, people who actually mattered to her. The world tilted sideways. 23 years of memories crashed through my mind like a slideshow on fast forward. Marcus teaching me to drive in the church parking lot after Sunday service. Marcus walking me through my first job interview over breakfast at our kitchen table. Marcus sitting in the front row at my high school graduation, cheering louder than anyone when I received the Academic Excellence Award. I don't understand, I managed to say, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. I am family. I've been your son for over 2 decades. Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or recognition of shared history. Stepson. There's a difference, Ryan. A legal difference, a biological difference, and most importantly, a financial difference. The words hit me like physical blows. Financial difference. What did money have to do with burying the woman who'd been the heart of our family? She was my mother, I said, the words coming out harder than I intended. She raised me. She loved me. I have every right to be here. Actually, you don't. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This is a restraining order, filed yesterday afternoon. If you come within 50 feet of this building today, if you attempt to enter this service, if you cause any disruption whatsoever, you'll be arrested. I stared at the paper he held out like it was a snake ready to strike. You got a restraining order to keep me from my own mother's funeral? Not your mother, my wife. And yes, I did what was necessary to ensure this day proceeds with dignity and respect. Ellen deserves better than having her troubled stepson causing scenes and making demands. Troubled stepson. The phrase echoed in my head like a curse word I'd never heard before. In 23 years, Marcus had never once referred to me as troubled. He'd been proud of my grades, proud of my acceptance to law school, proud of the internship I'd landed at Morrison & Associates. He'd bragged to his golf buddies about his son, the lawyer. What's this really about? I asked, though part of me was beginning to understand. The puzzle pieces were floating in my peripheral vision, not quite forming a complete picture, but suggesting an image I didn't want to see clearly. Marcus folded the restraining order and slipped it back into his pocket. It's about moving forward appropriately. Your mother is gone, Ryan. The family structure she maintained is gone with her. It's time you accept that reality and find your own way in the world. The family structure she maintained, I repeated slowly. You mean the part where she insisted you treat me like your actual son? For just a moment, Marcus's mask slipped, and I saw something raw and honest underneath. Not grief for his wife, but relief. Relief that the woman who'd spent over 2 decades making him pretend to love me was finally gone. Ellen was a wonderful woman with a generous heart, he said carefully, perhaps too generous. She made certain choices about family dynamics that I respected while she was alive, but she's not here to make those choices anymore. I wanted to hit him. For the first time in my life, I understood how people could be driven to violence by pure crystalline rage. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, and Marcus must have seen the change in my posture because he stepped back slightly. Don't Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Behind him, I could see mourners gathering near the chapel entrance, checking their phones, adjusting their dark clothing, preparing to celebrate the life of a woman who'd meant everything to me, and apparently nothing to the man she'd married. I recognized faces in the crowd. Mrs. Henderson from next door, who used to bring over casseroles when Mom worked late shifts at the hospital. Tom and Sarah Brennan from Mom's book club, people who'd been to our house dozens of times for holiday parties and summer barbecues. Rachel Morrison, my mom's closest friend since college, the woman who'd been like an aunt to me my entire life. None of them were looking in my direction. Either they hadn't seen me yet, or Marcus had already poisoned them against me somehow. The thought made my chest tight with a different kind of pain. "Did you tell them I wasn't coming?" I asked. "Or did you tell them I chose not to come?" Marcus shrugged, a gesture so casual it felt like another slap. "I told them the truth, that you wouldn't be joining us today." "That's not the truth. That's not even close to the truth." "It's the truth that matters now." He glanced at his watch, a gold Rolex that had been Mom's anniversary gift to him last year. "The service starts in 10 minutes. I suggest you use that time to drive away and begin adjusting to your new reality." I stood there in the memorial garden, surrounded by stone markers honoring people who'd been loved enough to be remembered permanently, and felt something fundamental break inside me. Not just heartbreak over Mom's death, though that pain was still fresh and terrible. This was different. This was the complete collapse of everything I'd believed about my place in the world. Marcus turned to walk back toward the chapel, his duty apparently done. But after a few steps, he paused and looked back at me. "For what it's worth, Ryan, your mother did care about you, in her way. But caring and being family aren't always the same thing. You'll understand that better once you've had time to process your grief." Then he was gone, striding back toward the chapel entrance with the confident gait of a man who'd just solved a problem efficiently. I watched him shake hands with arriving mourners, accept condolences with appropriate solemnity, play the part of the grieving widower with practiced ease. I wanted to follow him. I wanted to push past whatever security he'd arranged, storm into that chapel, and demand my right to say goodbye to the woman who'd been the only real parent I'd ever known. But as I took a step toward the building, I saw a police officer stationed near the side entrance, and another one walking slowly around the perimeter of the parking lot. Marcus hadn't been bluffing about the restraining order. So I did the only thing I could do. I walked back to my car, got behind the wheel, and sat there, watching as everyone I'd grown up thinking of as family filed into the chapel without me. Through the car windows, I could hear the faint sound of organ music beginning, the opening notes of Amazing Grace, Mom's favorite hymn. She used to hum it while cooking dinner, her voice soft and slightly off-key, but filled with such contentment that I'd learned to associate the melody with safety and home. Now it was playing without me, for people who apparently mattered more than the son she'd raised for over 2 decades. I started the engine, but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Rachel Morrison's number. If anyone would understand what was happening, if anyone could explain why Marcus was doing this, it would be Rachel. She and Mom had been inseparable, shared everything, trusted each other with secrets they'd never told anyone else. The call went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. She was inside the chapel, mourning my mother with everyone else who'd been deemed worthy of attendance. I tried calling my college roommate David, thinking I needed to talk to someone, anyone, who could help me make sense of this situation. But when he answered, I found myself unable to explain what had just happened. How do you tell someone that your family has suddenly decided you don't exist? How do you put into words the feeling of being erased from your own mother's funeral? I can't make it to the service, I told David instead. Family complications. Oh man, I'm sorry, he said, his voice genuinely sympathetic. Do you want me to drive down? I can be there in 2 hours. No, it's okay. I just need some time to think. After I hung up, I sat in the car for another 20 minutes, watching people emerge from the chapel for what I assumed was the processional to the cemetery. Marcus walked at the front of the group, his hand resting on the shoulder of an elderly woman I didn't recognize. Behind him came the pallbearers, 6 men in dark suits, carrying the casket that helped me to read, helped me with algebra homework, and stayed up all night when I had pneumonia in 7th grade. I wasn't among the pallbearers. I should have been. In any normal family, in any situation where love and history mattered more than legal technicalities, I would have been honored to carry her to her final resting place. Instead, I followed the funeral procession at a distance, staying far enough back to avoid violating the restraining order, but close enough to see where they laid her to rest. Hillcrest Memorial Garden, the same cemetery where Mom's parents were buried, where she'd taken me every Memorial Day to place flowers on their graves and tell me stories about the grandparents I'd never had a chance to meet. I parked on the street outside the cemetery gates and watched from behind a cluster of pine trees as the ceremony concluded. Marcus threw the first handful of dirt onto the casket. Other family members followed, people I'd grown up calling aunt and uncle and cousin, people who'd been part of every major milestone of my life until this moment. When it was over, when the crowd began to disperse toward their cars, I waited until everyone had left before walking to the gravesite. The temporary marker was simple: Ellen Marie Stenford, beloved wife and friend. No mention of mother. No acknowledgement of the role she'd played in my life. I knelt beside the fresh grave and placed the single white rose I'd brought, the same type of flower I'd given her every Mother's Day since I was old enough to buy my own gifts. "I'm sorry I couldn't be there," I whispered. "I'm sorry they wouldn't let me say goodbye properly. But I'm here now, and I promise I'll figure out why this happened." The walk back to my car felt like the longest journey of my life. As I reached the cemetery gates, my phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe someone from the service had realized I was missing, had questioned Marcus about my absence. But the message wasn't from a concerned family member. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Funeral reception at the Stenford residence. Family and close friends only. Your absence is appreciated. The message had clearly been sent to multiple recipients, but someone had made sure I received it too. A final reminder that I was no longer considered part of the family Marcus was hosting, no longer welcome in the house where I'd lived for most of my life. I drove home to my apartment across town, the small one-bedroom place I'd rented after law school, and sat in my living room surrounded by framed photos of happier times. Pictures of family vacations where Marcus had his arm around my shoulders. Images from my law school graduation where he stood proudly beside Mom, both of them beaming with what I'd believed was parental pride. Had it all been an act? Had Marcus spent over 2 decades pretending to care about me just to keep Mom happy? The possibility was almost too painful to consider, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. I opened my laptop and searched for information about restraining orders, about the legal grounds required to obtain one. The more I read, the angrier I became. To get a restraining order, Marcus would have had to convince a judge that I posed some kind of threat, that my presence at the funeral would endanger him or disrupt the service. What lies had he told to make that case? What fictional version of Ryan had he presented to the court? My phone rang, startling me out of my research spiral. The caller ID showed Rachel Morrison's name, and for a moment I felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone was reaching out. Someone was going to explain what had happened. "Rachel," I answered quickly, "thank God, I've been trying to reach you." "Ryan." Her voice was strange, formal in a way that immediately put me on edge. "I'm calling because Marcus asked me to. He wanted me to check on you, make sure you're handling everything appropriately." "Handling everything appropriately?" I repeated. "Rachel, he got a restraining order to keep me from Mom's funeral. He banned me from saying goodbye to the woman who raised me. How exactly am I supposed to handle that appropriately?" There was a long pause. Then Rachel sighed, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, but somehow more painful than Marcus's cold dismissal had been. "Ryan, honey, I know this is hard, but maybe it's time you accept that things are different now. Ellen was the bridge between you and Marcus, and with her gone, maybe it's better for everyone if you find your own path." Find your own path. The same phrase Marcus had used, almost word for word. "Did he tell you to say that?" I asked. "Did Marcus give you a script for this conversation?" "No, honey, he didn't. But he did explain the situation, and honestly, it might be for the best. Ellen always worried about what would happen to you when she was gone. She wanted you to be independent, to build your own life." My own life, separate from the only family I've ever known? Rachel was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her words hit me like a physical blow. "Ryan, honey, you're 29 years old. You have a good education, a promising career, your whole life ahead of you. Ellen would want you to focus on that instead of clinging to relationships that were always complicated." Always complicated. Another phrase that felt like it had been carefully chosen, workshopped, approved by Marcus before Rachel made this call. "Complicated how?" I demanded. "Because I wasn't his biological son? Because he had to pretend to love me for Mom's sake?" "That's not fair," Rachel said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Marcus did his best in a difficult situation. He gave you opportunities, supported your education, treated you well." Treated me well. Not loved me, not considered me family, but treated me well, like a houseguest who'd overstayed his welcome but been tolerated for the sake of politeness. "Did Mom know?" I asked quietly. "Did she know he was just going through the motions?" Rachel's silence was answer enough. After the call ended, I sat in my apartment as the sun set outside my windows, replaying every family interaction through this new lens of understanding. How many times had Marcus smiled at me while counting down the days until he wouldn't have to anymore? How many family photos had he posed for while privately resenting my presence? But there was something else bothering me, something beyond the immediate pain of rejection and betrayal. Throughout our entire conversation in the memorial garden, Marcus had seemed not just cold, but confident, absolutely certain that his actions were justified, that his position was unassailable. That confidence suggested he knew something I didn't, something that made him feel secure in his decision to cut me out so completely and so permanently. Most people, even cruel people, would show some hesitation about banning their stepson from his mother's funeral. The potential for public backlash alone would give most people pause. But Marcus had shown no such hesitation. He'd acted like a man who held all the cards, who knew the game was already won. I spent the rest of the evening going through the papers Mom had left in my care, documents she'd given me over the years for safekeeping or because she thought I should have copies. Birth certificates, insurance policies, the deed to the house she'd bought before she married Marcus, medical records from her cancer treatment. As I organized the papers into neat stacks, something occurred to me. In all the documents Mom had shared with me, I'd never seen her will. She'd mentioned having one, had talked about the importance of estate planning, but she'd never shown me the actual document or discussed its contents in detail. I'd assumed that was normal, that parents didn't typically share their wills with their children while they were still alive. But now, in light of Marcus's behavior, that omission seemed significant. Where was Mom's will? Who had possession of it? And what did it say about my place in her life and her plans for after she was gone? The questions circled in my mind as I tried to fall asleep that night, and I knew they'd still be there when I woke up. Marcus might have succeeded in keeping me from the funeral, but he couldn't keep me from seeking answers. Tomorrow, I would start looking for the truth about what Ellen Marie Stenford had really wanted for her son. Because despite what Marcus and Rachel and everyone else seemed to believe, I was her son. Not legally, maybe not biologically, but in every way that had mattered to her while she was alive. And if she'd left any indication of those feelings in her final wishes, I was going to find it. The last thing I remembered before finally drifting off to sleep was the sound of Amazing Grace playing in my memory. Mom's off-key humming mixing with the organ music I'd heard from outside the chapel. She'd wanted me there. I knew it in my bones, felt it in my heart, believed it with every fiber of my being. The question was whether I could prove it. 3 days after the funeral I wasn't allowed to attend, I found myself sitting in the lobby of Hartwell & Associates, the law firm that had handled Mom's estate planning for the past 15 years. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, kept glancing at me with what looked like sympathy mixed with confusion. "Mr. Stenford will see you in just a few minutes," she said for the 3rd time, her voice gentle. "Can I get you some coffee while you wait?" I declined again, my hands already shaking from too much caffeine and too little sleep. I'd spent the previous night going through every document Mom had ever given me, looking for any mention of Hartwell & Associates or any clue about her final wishes. What I'd found instead were years of careful financial records, insurance policies with my name listed as beneficiary, and a safe deposit box key I'd never seen before. The safe deposit box was what had led me here. I'd called the bank that morning, hoping to access whatever Mom had stored there, only to be told that the box was part of a larger estate that was currently under legal review. When I'd pressed for details, the bank manager had referred me to James Hartwell, Mom's longtime attorney. Ryan Stenford? A tall man in his 60s appeared in the lobby doorway, his expression unreadable. "I'm James Hartwell. Please come in." His office was exactly what I'd expected from an estate attorney. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound legal volumes lining the walls, and a massive desk that looked like it had been there since the building opened. What I hadn't expected was the stack of files with my mother's name on them, sitting prominently in the center of that desk. "I have to say I'm surprised to see you," Hartwell said as he settled into his chair. "Given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Hartwell opened one of the files and pulled out a sheet of letterhead stationery. "I received a letter from Marcus Stenford 3 days ago, informing me that you wouldn't be participating in the estate proceedings. He indicated that you'd made it clear you wanted no part of your stepmother's affairs." The words hit me like a physical blow. Stepmother. Not mother, not the woman who raised me, but stepmother. As if our relationship had been nothing more than a legal technicality. "That's not true," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I never said anything like that. In fact, Marcus has been doing everything possible to keep me away from anything related to Mom's estate." Hartwell's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's very interesting and concerning." He leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the careful attention of someone who'd spent decades reading people in emotional distress. "Tell me what's been happening, Ryan. Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about the restraining order, about being banned from the funeral, about the phone call from Rachel where she'd clearly been coached on what to say. I told him about Marcus's confidence, his certainty that he could erase me from Mom's life without consequence. When I finished, Hartwell was quiet for a long moment, tapping his pen against the desk in a rhythm that reminded me somehow of Mom's nervous habits. "This is very troubling," he said finally, "because it suggests that Marcus either doesn't understand the contents of your mother's will, or he's deliberately trying to circumvent her wishes." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" Hartwell opened another file, this one thicker than the first. "Your mother updated her will 6 months ago, Ryan. She came in here specifically to make sure her intentions were crystal clear, legally bulletproof. She was very concerned about potential conflicts after her death. Conflicts between me and Marcus, among other things." Hartwell pulled out a document that looked official and intimidating, multiple pages bound with a blue backing. She was quite explicit about wanting you to be present for the reading of the will. In fact, she made it a legal requirement. I stared at the document, afraid to hope. What does that mean exactly? It means that the will cannot be probated and the estate cannot be distributed until you've been present for a formal reading. Your mother specifically wrote a clause requiring your attendance and acknowledgement before any of her final wishes can be carried out. The room felt like it was spinning. So Marcus can't inherit anything until I'm involved? That's correct. And there's more. Hartwell flipped through several pages, his finger tracing lines of legal text. Your mother appointed you as co-executor of the estate, alongside Marcus. She wanted to ensure that both of her family members had equal say in how her affairs were handled. Co-executor, equal say. The words felt foreign after days of being treated like an unwanted stranger. Does Marcus know this? I asked. Hartwell's expression darkened. He should. I sent him a copy of the updated will when your mother signed it 6 months ago. I also sent him a letter after her death, informing him of the legal requirements for probate. But he's been acting like I have no legal standing at all. Then he's either chosen to ignore the law, or he's gambling that you won't assert your rights. Hartwell leaned forward, his voice becoming more serious. Ryan, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Has Marcus or anyone else pressured you to renounce your inheritance or sign away your rights as co-executor? No, nothing like that. He's just been trying to keep me away from everything entirely. Hartwell made a note in the file. That's actually more concerning than outright coercion. It suggests he's operating under the assumption that you won't discover your legal rights, or that you won't have the resources to enforce them. I thought about the restraining order, about the funeral I'd been banned from attending, about Rachel's carefully scripted phone call encouraging me to find my own path. He's been trying to isolate me, I said slowly, making sure I don't talk to anyone who might tell me what Mom really wanted. That would be my assessment as well. Hartwell closed the file and looked at me directly. Ryan, I'm going to be very frank with you. Your mother's estate is substantial, much more substantial than most people realize. She was an excellent investor, very conservative, but very successful over many years. She also inherited some valuable properties from her parents that have appreciated significantly. How substantial are we talking about? Including the house, the investment portfolio, and various other assets, we're looking at an estate worth approximately $2.7 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd known Mom was comfortable financially, knew she'd been smart with money, but I'd had no idea she'd accumulated that kind of wealth. And Marcus inherits all of this? Hartwell shook his head. That's where things get very interesting. Your mother left specific instructions about how the estate should be divided. Marcus inherits the house and approximately 40% of the liquid assets. You inherit the remainder of the investments, along with some personal items she specifically wanted you to have. That's over $1 million, I said, barely believing the words as they came out of my mouth. 1.6 million, to be precise. Plus the contents of the safe deposit box, which she indicated contained items of significant personal value that she wanted you to possess. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this information. Mom had left me more than $1 million, had made me co-executor of her estate, had legally required my presence at the will reading. Yet Marcus had convinced everyone that I was just a stepson with no real claim to be part of the family. There's something else, Hartwell continued. Your mother included a sealed letter addressed specifically to you to be opened only in your presence during the will reading. She was very insistent about this particular provision. A sealed letter, Mom's final words to me, words that Marcus had been trying to make sure I'd never receive. When is the will reading supposed to take place? I asked. Hartwell checked his calendar. It was originally scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Marcus requested the earliest possible date, citing a desire to handle everything quickly and efficiently. But obviously, it cannot proceed without your presence. And he knows this? I've sent him 3 letters and left 2 voicemails explaining the legal requirements. He hasn't responded to any of my communications. The picture was becoming clearer. Marcus had been hoping that by isolating me, by convincing everyone that I'd chosen not to be involved, he could somehow bypass the legal requirements and claim the entire estate. When that plan failed, when Hartwell couldn't proceed without me, Marcus had simply gone silent, probably hoping to delay the process until he could find another solution. "What happens if I don't show up tomorrow?" I asked, though I already knew I'd be there. "Then the will cannot be probated, and the estate remains in legal limbo indefinitely. No one inherits anything. The house can't be sold, the investments can't be transferred, none of your mother's final wishes can be carried out." And Marcus knows this too? Assuming he read the documentation I sent him, yes. I left Hartwell's office with a copy of the will and a new understanding of why Marcus had been so confident in his cruelty. He'd been banking on my ignorance, on my assumption that I had no legal rights or standing. He'd expected me to retreat quietly, to accept his version of reality and disappear from his life without causing trouble. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to think about everything I'd learned. Mom had known this conflict was coming. She'd anticipated that Marcus might try to cut me out, and she'd taken legal steps to protect me and ensure her wishes were honored. The woman who'd raised me had been thinking about my future, even as she was dying, making sure I'd be taken care of, even if the man she'd married for 23 years turned out to be someone she couldn't trust. That evening, I called David, my college roommate who was now working as a corporate lawyer in Charlotte. "You're not gonna believe what I found out today," I told him when he answered. "Try me." I explained everything, from the funeral ban to the will reading, from Marcus's silence to my newfound status as a millionaire heir. When I finished, David whistled low. "Holy shit, Ryan, your stepdad really thought he could just steal your inheritance?" "Apparently so. What are you going to do?" "Show up at the will reading tomorrow and find out what Mom wanted me to know. Do you want me to drive down? This sounds like the kind of thing where you might want moral support." I considered the offer. Having David there would be comforting, but it would also complicate things. Tomorrow was going to be emotional enough without adding more people to the mix. "Thanks, but I think I need to handle this on my own. It's what Mom would have wanted." That night, I reread the copy of the will Hartwell had given me, trying to understand every clause and provision. The language was dense and formal, full of legal terminology that made my head spin. But the core message was clear. Ellen Marie Stenford had wanted to make sure her son was taken care of, no matter what anyone else thought about the legitimacy of that relationship. The next morning, I put on the same black suit I'd worn to try to attend her funeral. It seemed appropriate somehow, like I was finally getting the chance to honor her memory the way she'd intended. I arrived at Hartwell's office 15 minutes early and spent the time in my car trying to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. At exactly 2 o'clock, I walked into the law office and found Marcus already seated in Hartwell's conference room. He was wearing another expensive suit, his posture rigid with barely contained anger. When he saw me enter, his face went through a series of expressions, settling finally on resigned fury. "Ryan," he said tightly, "I thought you'd decided not to be involved in Ellen's affairs." "Did you?" I replied, taking the seat directly across from him. "Because that's strange, since I never told anyone I wouldn't be involved. In fact, it seems like you went to a lot of trouble to make sure I couldn't be involved." Marcus's jaw twitched, but he didn't respond. Hartwell entered the room carrying several files and the same thick document I'd seen the day before. "Gentlemen, thank you both for being here. As you know, we're gathered for the reading of Ellen Marie Stenford's last will and testament." He sat at the head of the table, positioning himself between Marcus and me like a referee preparing for a fight. "Before we begin with the specific bequests," Hartwell continued, "I need to address some procedural issues. Marcus, I've been trying to reach you for several days regarding the legal requirements for this proceeding." "I've been busy with funeral arrangements and other matters," Marcus replied stiffly. "I'm sure. However, your failure to respond to my communications has created some complications. Specifically, your assertion that Ryan had chosen not to participate in the estate proceedings was directly contrary to the requirements set forth in your wife's will. Marcus's face reddened slightly. I was told that Ryan wanted nothing to do with Ellen's estate. Told by whom? Hartwell asked. It was my understanding based on our conversations. I leaned forward. We never had any conversations about Mom's estate, Marcus. The only conversation we had was when you banned me from her funeral. That's not how I remember it. Hartwell held up a hand to prevent the argument from escalating. Regardless of any miscommunications, we're here now, and we can proceed with the reading. Ryan, as co-executor, you have the right to review all estate documents and ask questions about any provisions that aren't clear. Marcus's head snapped up. Co-executor? Yes. Didn't you read the will I sent you 6 months ago? Ellen appointed both you and Ryan as co-executors with equal decision-making authority over the estate. I watched Marcus's face as this information sank in. His confident mask was finally slipping, replaced by something that looked like panic. That can't be right, he said. Ellen would never. We discussed this. She understood that I would handle everything. Perhaps you discussed it, Hartwell said diplomatically, but her final legal instructions were quite different. Now, shall we proceed with the reading? Marcus nodded stiffly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair like he was trying to anchor himself to reality. Hartwell began reading the formal language of the will, the legal preamble about sound mind and body, the revocation of previous wills, the appointment of executors. Then he reached the section about specific bequests. To my beloved husband Marcus, I leave the family home at 847 Oakwood Drive, along with all furnishings and household items, and 40% of my liquid investment assets, currently valued at approximately $1.1 million. Marcus exhaled slightly, apparently relieved that he was getting something substantial. Hartwell continued reading. To my son Ryan, whom I have loved and cherished as my own child for 23 years, I leave the remainder of my investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $1.6 million, as well as all contents of safe deposit box number 247 at First National Bank, and the following personal items. The word son hung in the air like a declaration of war. Not stepson, not ward, not the child I helped raise, but son. Mom had used her final legal document to make her feelings absolutely clear. Hartwell read through a list of personal items Mom had specifically wanted me to have. Her jewelry box that had belonged to her mother, the antique desk she'd used for her writing, her collection of first-edition novels, and several other pieces that held sentimental value. When he finished reading the bequests, Marcus was staring at the table, his face pale with shock or rage, or both. There's one more item, Hartwell said, pulling out a sealed envelope. Ellen left specific instructions that this letter be read aloud in the presence of both executors. He opened the envelope carefully and unfolded a sheet of paper covered in Mom's familiar handwriting. My throat tightened as I recognized her neat script, the same handwriting that had signed permission slips and birthday cards throughout my childhood. Hartwell cleared his throat and began to read. If you are hearing this letter, it means I am gone, and both Marcus and Ryan are present to learn about my final wishes. I want both of you to understand why I have made the choices reflected in this will. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but didn't speak. Hartwell continued reading Mom's words. Marcus, you have been a good husband to me for 23 years. You provided stability and companionship during the years when I was raising Ryan alone, and I am grateful for the life we built together. However, I know that your feelings toward Ryan have always been complicated, and I fear that after my death, you may not honor the relationship I have with my son. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Marcus's face went from pale to flushed, his hands clenching into fists. Ryan, Hartwell read, you are my greatest pride and joy. From the moment you came into my life, you have been my son in every way that matters. Not legally, not biologically, but in love, in heart, in the bond that exists between a parent and child. I have watched you grow into a man of integrity and compassion, and I could not be more proud of who you have become. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of Marcus, not after everything he'd put me through. The letter continued. I have structured my will to ensure that Ryan is provided for financially, but more importantly, to make it clear that he is and always has been my family. I hope that after my death, both of you can find a way to honor the relationship we all shared, but I know that may not be possible. If it is not, I want Ryan to know that he has my love and support even from beyond a grave. Hartwell folded the letter and set it on the table. The silence that followed was thick with tension and unresolved emotion. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. She was manipulated. "Excuse me?" I said. Marcus turned to face me directly for the first time since the reading began. "Ellen was manipulated into writing that will. You worked on her while she was sick, convinced her to cut me out of what should have been my inheritance." "I didn't even know she had a will," I replied. "I certainly didn't know what was in it." "I don't believe you. No one leaves that much money to a stepchild unless they've been pressured or manipulated into doing it," Hartwell interjected. "Marcus, I need to stop you there. First, Ellen came to me of her own volition to update her will. There was no pressure or manipulation involved. Second, your characterization of Ryan as merely a stepchild is not how Ellen saw the relationship, as her letter makes clear. The letter proves nothing, except that she was sentimental about a child she felt sorry for." The words stung, but they also clarified something important. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. This was about Marcus's fundamental inability to accept that Mom had genuinely loved me, that her feelings weren't just maternal charity or misguided sentiment. "There's one more thing," Hartwell said, pulling out another document. "Ellen also left instructions about what should happen if there were any legal challenges to the will or attempts to contest its provisions." Marcus looked up sharply. "What kind of instructions?" "If anyone contests this will or attempts to prevent its execution, Ellen requested that the entire estate be donated to the American Cancer Society, with the exception of the house, which would go to Ryan regardless of any legal challenges." The room fell silent again. Mom had anticipated this exact scenario, had known that Marcus might try to fight her final wishes, and she'd made sure there would be consequences for any such attempt. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this fantasy about family relationships that never existed. Ellen was a good woman, but she was naive about a lot of things." "Marcus," Hartwell said firmly, "you are certainly free to leave, but I need to remind you that as co-executor, your cooperation is required for the probate process. If you refuse to participate, it will significantly complicate the distribution of the estate. And I need to remind you that I have been Ellen's husband for 23 years. I built a life with her, supported her through her illness, took care of her when she needed it most. I won't be pushed aside by someone who happened to benefit from her generosity." With that, Marcus walked out of the conference room, leaving me alone with Hartwell and the echo of his accusations. "Well," Hartwell said after a moment, "that went about as well as I expected." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we begin the probate process. Marcus's cooperation would make things easier, but it's not legally required. As co-executor, you have the authority to make decisions about the estate even if he refuses to participate." I looked at the will, at the letter Mom had written, at the legal documents that proved her love for me in ways that Marcus would apparently never accept. "There's something else I need to tell you," Hartwell said, "something Ellen asked me to share with you privately after the will reading." He pulled out one more envelope, this one with just my name written on the outside in Mom's handwriting. "She wanted you to have this, but she wanted it to be separate from the formal proceedings. She said it contained information that Marcus didn't need to know about." I took the envelope with trembling hands, feeling the weight of whatever final secret Mom had wanted to share with me and me alone. I waited until I was alone in my apartment before opening the envelope Mom had left specifically for me. My hands shook as I unfolded the pages inside, 3 sheets of paper covered in her careful handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before she died. "My dearest Ryan," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then you have survived Marcus's attempts to erase you from my life and our family's history. I am so proud of you for being strong enough to fight for what is rightfully yours." The words made my chest tight with emotion, but I kept reading. "There are things I need to tell you that I never had the courage to say while I was alive. Secrets I kept to protect you, to protect our family, to protect the peace I thought we all needed. But peace built on lies isn't real peace, and you deserve to know the truth about who you are and why Marcus has always resented your place in our lives." I set the letter down for a moment, my heart pounding. What secrets could Mom have been keeping? What truth was so significant that she'd hidden it from my entire life? I picked up the letter again and continued reading. "Ryan, you are not just my son by choice and love. You are my biological son. Marcus is not your stepfather. He is your father." The room seemed to tilt around me. I read the sentence 3 more times, certain I was misunderstanding something fundamental about the words on the page. "I know this comes as a shock, and I know you must be wondering why I never told you. The truth is complicated and painful, but you deserve to understand the whole story. My biological father, Marcus, the man who had banned me from my mother's funeral, who had treated me like an unwelcome stranger, who had tried to steal my inheritance, was actually my father?" The room seemed to tilt around me. I read the sentence 3 more times, certain I was misunderstanding something fundamental about the words on the page. "I know this comes as a shock, and I know you must be wondering why I never told you. The truth is complicated and painful, but you deserve to understand the whole story. My biological father, Marcus, the man who had banned me from my mother's funeral, who had treated me like an unwelcome stranger, who had tried to steal my inheritance, was actually my father?" The room seemed to tilt around me. I read the sentence 3 more times, certain I was misunderstanding something fundamental about the words on the page. "I know this comes as a shock, and I know you must be wondering why I never told you. The truth is complicated and painful, but you deserve to understand the whole story. My biological father, Marcus, the man who had banned me from my mother's funeral, who had treated me like an unwelcome stranger, who had tried to steal my inheritance, was actually my father?" The letter continued. "When you were born, Marcus and I were not married. We had been dating for about a year, but we were young and not ready for the commitment that parenthood requires. When I told Marcus I was pregnant, he panicked. He said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he needed time to figure out his life and career. He asked me to consider adoption, and when I refused, he left. I had to stop reading and walk to the kitchen, splash cold water on my face, try to process what I was learning about the foundation of my entire life. When I returned to the letter, Mom's words continued to reshape everything I thought I knew. For the first 6 years of your life, it was just you and me. Marcus had no contact with us during that time. He moved to another state, started a new job, built a new life. I raised you alone, and honestly, we were happy. You were such a bright, wonderful child, and I loved being your mother more than anything in the world. 6 years. Marcus had abandoned us for 6 years, leaving Mom to raise me as a single parent while he lived his life without the inconvenience of a child he wasn't ready to acknowledge. When you turned 6, Marcus came back. He had established himself professionally, bought a house, decided he was ready to be part of a family. But he didn't want people to know he had abandoned his son for 6 years. He was concerned about how that would look to his colleagues, his friends, the community he was trying to be part of. I felt sick to my stomach. The picture Mom was painting was of a man so concerned with his reputation that he had been willing to rewrite history rather than admit to his past mistakes. So we created a story, the letter continued.
We decided to tell people that you were my son from a previous relationship, that Marcus was your stepfather who had generously taken on the responsibility of raising another man's child. It made him look good, made him seem noble and selfless, and it protected you from having to know that your father had walked away from you when you were just a baby. The elaborate fiction of my childhood suddenly made sense. The reason there were no photos of me with Marcus from my early years. The reason certain family friends seemed confused about our family dynamics. The reason Marcus's parents had always seemed distant and uncomfortable around me. They all knew the truth. I was the only one who had been living a lie. I thought I was doing the right thing, Mom wrote. I thought it would be easier for you to have a stepfather who chose to love you than to know you had a biological father who had rejected you. But as the years went by, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. The letter explained how Marcus had never fully committed to being my father, even after their marriage. How he had always maintained emotional distance, treating me well enough in public, but never truly accepting me as his son. He did his duty, Mom wrote. He provided for you financially. He attended your school events. He was never cruel or abusive. But he never loved you the way a father should love his child. And the older you got, the more resentful he became about having to maintain the pretense. I thought about all the times growing up when I had sensed that distance, when I had wondered why Marcus never seemed as proud of me as other fathers seemed to be of their children. I had blamed it on the lack of biological connection, never knowing that the biological connection had always been there, just denied and hidden. The hardest part, the letter continued, was watching you try so hard to earn his love and approval. You worked yourself to the bone trying to make him proud, trying to prove yourself worthy of being called his son. It broke my heart because you were already his son, had always been his son, and he was the one who wasn't worthy of you. I had to put the letter down again. 29 years of trying to win the love of a man who had every biological and moral reason to love me, but who had chosen instead to see me as an obligation, a burden, a reminder of his own failures. When I picked up the letter again, Mom's final paragraphs were waiting. I should have told you the truth years ago. I should have given you the choice about whether to maintain a relationship with a father who couldn't fully accept you. Instead, I enabled his emotional abandonment by pretending it was normal, by making excuses for his behavior, by teaching you to be grateful for the bare minimum of paternal care. She went on to explain that she had tried several times over the years to convince Marcus to tell me the truth, to step up and be the father I deserved. Each time he had refused, claiming that revealing the truth would only cause unnecessary pain and disruption. But I think the real reason he never wanted you to know is that he was afraid of your reaction. He was afraid you would reject him the way he had rejected you. He was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would see him for what he really was. A man who walked away from his own child and spent decades pretending to be noble for taking care of a problem he had created. The letter concluded with an apology and a promise. Ryan, I am so sorry I kept this from you for so long.
How so? Well, for one thing, it means he knowingly provided false information when he filed for the restraining order. He told the court that you were just a stepson with no real family connection. If he's actually your biological father, then his characterization of the relationship was fraudulent. I hadn't thought about the legal implications beyond the emotional revelation, but Hartwell was right. Marcus had used false information to keep me away from my mother's funeral, denying not just our mother-son relationship, but also concealing his own parental responsibility. There's something else, Hartwell continued. If Marcus is your biological father and he inherited property during your minority that should have been held in trust for you as his child, there could be additional legal issues with how the estate has been handled over the years. I asked Hartwell to explain what he meant. Well, Ellen's parents left her some valuable real estate when they died 15 years ago. Since you were their grandson, both by adoption and apparently by blood through Ellen, you may have had inheritance rights that were never properly addressed. The layers of deception and legal complexity were overwhelming. Not only had Marcus tried to steal my inheritance from Mom, but he may have been denying me rightful claims to other family assets for years. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. Hartwell leaned back in his chair, considering. "That depends on what outcome you're hoping to achieve. If you want to pursue every possible legal claim, we could potentially recover significant additional assets and possibly pursue fraud charges related to the restraining order. But that would mean years of litigation and a very public airing of all these family secrets. And if I don't want to go that route, then we proceed with probating Ellen's will as planned. You inherit what she intended for you, and Marcus inherits his portion. The truth about your parentage remains between you and anyone you choose to share it with." I thought about the choice for several days. Part of me wanted to expose everything, to make Marcus face consequences for decades of deception and emotional abandonment. But another part of me was exhausted by the conflict, ready to take what Mom had left me and build a new life away from all the lies and resentment. In the end, I decided to call Marcus directly. He answered on the third ring, his voice cautious when he heard my name. "Ryan, I assume you're calling about the estate." "Actually, I'm calling about the letter Mom left me, the private one that Hartwell gave me after the will reading." There was a long silence. Then Marcus sighed deeply. "She told you. She told me everything. About you leaving when I was born, about the story you created to hide your abandonment, about 23 years of pretending to be my stepfather instead of admitting you were my biological father." Another silence, longer this time. "What do you want, Ryan?" "I want to understand. Why? Why you left? Why you came back? Why you spent my entire life treating me like I was someone else's burden when I was your son?" Marcus was quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than I had ever heard it. Tired, defeated, maybe even a little ashamed. "I was 24 when you were born," he said. 24 and terrified. My own father had walked out on my family when I was 12, and I swore I would never do that to a child. But when Ellen told me she was pregnant, all I could think about was how trapped I felt, how unprepared I was, how much I was going to fail at being a father. He paused, and I could hear him breathing heavily. So I ran. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed some time to get my life together, to figure out how to be the father you deserved. But the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to come back. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that Daddy left because he was scared? How do you apologize for missing birthdays and first steps and all the moments that matter? I listened without interrupting, finally hearing the explanation I had wondered about my entire life. "When I came back, you were 6. You were this incredible kid, smart and funny, and so much like Ellen. But you were also a stranger. I had missed your entire early childhood, and I didn't know how to connect with you. I didn't know how to be your father after failing to be your father for so long." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "So I took the coward's way out again. I let people believe I was your stepfather because it was easier than admitting I had abandoned my own child. It made me look good instead of making me face what I had really done." "And you resented me for that," I said, "for making you live with the lie." "I resented myself," Marcus corrected, "but it was easier to direct that resentment toward you. Every time I looked at you, I saw my own failure as a father. Every time you tried to make me proud, I was reminded of all the years I wasn't there to be proud of you." The conversation continued for over an hour. Marcus told me things I had never known about his own childhood, about his fears and insecurities, about the ways his father's abandonment had shaped his own inability to commit fully to being a parent. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it helped me understand it. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Marcus said near the end of our call. "I know I failed you in every way a father can fail a son. But I want you to know that Ellen was right about one thing. You became an incredible man despite having me as a father, not because of it." When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected, Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of closure. The mystery of my childhood, the questions about why I never felt quite secure in my place in the family, finally had answers. A week later, we completed the probate process. I inherited the money Mom had left me, along with her personal items and the contents of the safe deposit box, which turned out to contain jewelry that had belonged to my great-grandmother, documents about our family history, and a collection of letters Mom had written to me over the years but never given me. Marcus and I found a way to work together as co-executors, handling the necessary paperwork and legal requirements with professional courtesy, if not warmth. He didn't contest the will or attempt to claim more than Mom had left him. 3 months later, I used part of my inheritance to buy a small house across town, far enough from the old neighborhood to feel like a fresh start, but close enough to visit Mom's grave whenever I needed to feel connected to her. I never did pursue the legal claims Hartwell had mentioned. The money Mom left me was more than enough to build the life I wanted, and the truth about my parentage was worth more than any additional assets I might have recovered through litigation. Marcus and I don't have a relationship now, but we don't have the bitter animosity that marked the weeks after Mom's death either. We exchange brief, polite messages on holidays and birthdays. He's never apologized directly for banning me from the funeral or trying to deny my inheritance, but he's never repeated those behaviors either. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if Mom had told me the truth when I was younger. If she had forced Marcus to confront his role as my father, instead of allowing him to hide behind the stepfather fiction. But I've learned that wondering about alternative histories is less useful than appreciating the truth I finally received. The most important truth is the one Mom stated clearly in her will and her letters. I was her son in every way that mattered, and she loved me completely and unconditionally. That love sustained her through decades of watching Marcus struggle to accept me, and it sustains me now as I build a life that honors her memory and the values she taught me. Every Sunday, I visit her grave and tell her about my week, about the small victories and challenges of daily life. I always bring white roses, the same flowers I gave her every Mother's Day. And I always end each visit the same way, with words I wish I had been allowed to say at her funeral. Thank you for being my mom. Thank you for loving me enough to fight for me even after you were gone. The headstone still lists her as Ellen Marie Stenford, beloved wife and friend. But I know the truth now. She was also a beloved mother, and she made sure that truth would survive even when the people who should have protected it chose not to. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.